the breakdown of democracy and open society, and what do we do about that, and how that relates to breakdown in culture and breakdown in market. We can look at those, the relationship between those three types of entities. So a way of thinking about what the architectural idea of a liberal democracy is, and why, say, the founders of this country set it up not as a pure laissez-faire market, but as a state that had regulatory power and a market together, was the idea is that a market will provision lots of goods and services better than a centralized government will. So let's leave the market to do the kind of provisioning of resource and innovation that it does well. But the market will also do a couple really bad things. It will lead to increasing asymmetries of wealth inexorably. This is what Piketty's data showed, but it's just obvious. Having more money increases your capacity to have access to financial services, and you make interest on debt and on compounding interest on wealth. And so you end up getting a power law distribution of wealth. So then a few people in just the market dynamic would be able to have way outsized control over everyone else against everyone else's interests. And the market creates opportunities for things that are really bad. We all know that, like, we want there to be a thing called crime where where even though there's a market incentive for child sex trafficking and whatever else, we say, no, we're going to create some rule of law that binds that thing and not just have market drive it. So the idea is that we create a state that we actually give a monopoly of violence to. So it has even more power at the bottom of the stack of what power is than the top of the economic power law distribution. So the wealthiest people and the wealthiest corporations will still be bound by this rule of law. And the rule of law is an encoding of the collective ethics of the people, right? The ethics are the basis of jurisprudence. And there is some kind of democratic process of getting to say, what is it that we consider the good life and important that we want enshrined in rule of law? We give that a monopoly of violence. And really then the goal of the state is to bind the predatory aspects of market incentive while leaving the market to do the things that it does well. But pretty much every law is where someone has an incentive to do something, which is a market type dynamic that is bad for the whole enough that we make a law to bind it. Okay, so the purpose of a state is to bind the predatory aspects of a market. That only works as long as the people bind the state. And the people bind the state if you have a government of, for, and by the people, of an educated populace who had a quality of education that were capable of understanding all the issues upon which we are governing and making law, and a fourth estate where the news that they are getting is of adequate quality and unbiased enough that they're informed about what's currently happening. If you think about that, that's what a republic would require. And you realize that both public education and the fourth estate have eroded so badly for so long. It's not that we're close to losing our democracy. It's dead. We don't have a republic. We have a permanent political class and a permanent economic lobbying class. And the people who aren't really actively engaged in government in any way at all, beyond maybe jury duty now and again if they can't get out of it. And if the people, to be engaged in government in any meaningful way, had to tell the DOE what they think should be done about grid security and energy policy, or tell the DOD what should be done about nuclear first strike policy, or tell the Fed and Treasury what they think about interest rates, they have no fucking idea how to have a governance of, for, and by the people. They don't have that education. They don't have the media basis. So if the people can't check the state, then the state will end up getting captured by the market. And so you'll end up having the head of the FDA be someone who ran a big drug or a big ag company, and the head of the DOD being somebody who ran Lockheed or some military industrial complex manufacturer. You'll have just lobbying, just straightforward lobbying gets paid for by somebody. Who's it get paid for? Those who have the money to pay for lots of lobbyists. And so then you end up getting a crony capitalist structure, which is worse than just an evil market, because now it has the regulatory apparatus of rule of law and monopoly of violence backing up the market type, the dynamics. So then we say, okay, well, what do we do here? And we see that civilizations fail towards either oppression or chaos, right? Those are the two fail states. They fail towards oppression if trying to create some coherence happens through a top-down forcing function. They fail towards chaos if not having enough top-down forcing function. Everybody kind of believes whatever they want, but they have no unifying basis for belief. And so then they will end up going into, they'll balkanize, they'll tribalize, and then the tribal groups will fight against each other. If you don't want to, so either we keep failing towards chaos, which we can see is happening in the West and in the US in particular right now. And then China, which is happy to do the oppression thing, and oppression beats chaos in war, right? Because it has more ability to execute effectively, which is why China has built high-speed trains all around the world when we haven't built a single one in our country. So either we lose to China in the 21st century and oppression runs the 21st century, or we beat China at being China, meaning beat it at oppression, or it's like, fuck, those are both failure modes. What is there other than oppression or chaos? Is order that is emergent, not imposed, which requires a culture of people who can all make sense of the world on their own and communicate effectively to have shared sense-making as a basis for shared choice-making. The idea of an open society is that some huge number of people can all make choices together, a huge number of people who see the world differently and are anonymous to each other, not a tribe. That was an Enlightenment era idea, right? Born out of the idea that we could all make sense of the world together, born out of the philosophy of science and the Hegelian dialectic, that we could make sense of base reality and that we could make sense of each other's perspective, dialectic, find a synthesis, and then be able to have that be the basis of governance. So what I think is this is not an adequate long-term structure, because we can talk about why tech has made nation-state democracies obsolete, and it's just not obvious yet, but it has. But as an intermediate structure, the reboot of the thing that was intended has to start at the level of the people, at culture, and at collective sense-making and collective good faith dialogue, because without that, you can't bind state. Without that, you can't bind market incentive.